Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Fem Talk. And as always, we have a great show for you today. You do not want to miss this. So tune in, stay right here. I want you right now to grab your water, grab whatever you need, and stay tuned. Here we go. I'm bringing in Dr. Mimi Melissa Simmons.
Hello, Fem Talk Nation! Woo, 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 woo!
Hello, Dr. Mimi. And our very own She Talks is actually on vacation this week. Yes, she is sailing the high seas, sailing the high seas on a cruise.
Yes.
So tonight, everyone, we, as we always do, we are asking Fem Talk. All right, so let's do this. We have this question that came in, and we definitely want to make sure that you send in your burning questions so that we can give you our insights and opinions. So send all of your burning questions to, you see it scrolling there, femtalktv@gmail.com.
I love this piece. I love it. I love these questions. Fem Talk Nation, you're killing it with the questions. I am in love with them. Send questions. More.
more. I love it. So this one tonight says, I went on a date with a guy I met on a dating app. We were texting back and forth for 2 weeks before we met up. We went bowling, and throughout the date, the guy was very excited to talk about himself, but never once asked me a question about myself. So I had to volunteer information to keep the conversation going. Towards the end of the date, I wasn't feeling it so much. So at the end, I said goodbye, and I waited, with him for his Uber because he didn't want to drive to the date. Later on, I mentioned to him that I think we would be better off as friends, and he responded requesting his money for the Uber. I ignored him, and 2 days later, he sent me that message again, so I blocked him. And the question is, am I wrong? Do you want to start with this one, Dr. Melissa?
No, block him. I mean, make sure you keep blocking him. Are you wrong? Well, I mean, you know what? Always trust that spirit, that inner, when people saying that gut, that spirit inside, that voice that is talking to you, you picked up something wrong from the beginning. And, sign number one, he's talking about himself, already self-absorbed. It's all about him. Don't even know who you are. Again, sign one, sign two, the whole night waiting for the Uber. I mean, how did he really text you to pay for the Uber? Oh, that's some shade. That is tacky shade all around.
Absolutely.
Good move.
Absolutely. And listen, the dating is at your own risk. If you go on a dating app or if you meet someone out randomly, right, and you're expecting to go on a date and you decide to meet up, oftentimes the expense of, your Uber, your gas, whatever it is to actually get to the date is on you. This is a first encounter. As this person explained, it was a first encounter. So your expenses to meet that person is on you. So yes, I think that this person was absolutely right for ignoring the person later and blocking them if they're going to continue to ask for their Uber money. This was at their own risk. They took the risk. It didn't work out, and it's okay. Move on.
Move on. Move
Right?
on is right. I mean, not for you, not the person, for
Right.
you. And yeah, something's wrong with him, with the person that wanted the Uber. I don't know if it's him or her, but
Yeah.
something's wrong with them. They got issues, because
Yeah.
why would you think you should ask a person for your Uber? I mean, that's your Uber to get there. Come on.
Absolutely. It sounds like
Grow
a
up.
little bit of entitlement there with the person who's requesting the money back.
Like I
But
said, trust that instinct that
yeah,
you picked it up. Something's wrong. So good for you.
yeah. And if someone is not interested in asking you about yourself, right? If they just want to talk about themselves, then they should date themselves. Take their Uber and go elsewhere and date themselves.
Bye bye. See you later.
Bye bye. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
For sure. So, listen, everyone, we have an exciting show for you this evening. This gentleman has such a compelling story that we want to tell here because, it's so impactful and it happens all too often these days. Unfortunately, these things happen all too often. So, we want to make sure that we are getting to all the good stuff with Mr. Jeffrey Deskovich. And I hope I said that right, Jeff. And if I didn't, you can correct me when you come on. Here we go. Here we go. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great, Tracy. How are you and Melissa doing tonight?
We are great. Thank you.
We are good. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Did I say your name correctly? I want to make sure I say your last name
You
correctly.
you did. Yes,
Okay.
you did. Deskovic.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. So I want us to get right into this because I know that there's so much to share. I mean, we had a conversation and we had a brief conversation and there was a lot that was discussed in a very small amount of time. And your story is so compelling and everything that you have to share and everything that you're doing and making the impact in the world that you are just coming out of your story. So I want you to just start off by telling us, your background. I think everybody can see that this is called wrongly convicted, but talk to us about, how that came about. How were you wrongfully convicted?
So the year was 1990. It was in Peekskill, New York, which is in Westchester County. So it was a suburb. It was middle class. It was ethnically diverse. Murders were fairly rare. So a classmate who was in two of my classes, a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name. She knew mine. That was really the extent of it. She went missing. And then her body was found naked from the waist down a couple of days later. So Peekskill essentially shut down. I mean, there was town hall meetings held on safety tips and updates on investigation. Parents were driving their kids to school, picking them up right afterwards, bringing them straight home. There was a general atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. So in high school, I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports. So that made me seem strange to the kids in the high school. In the course of the investigation, the police interviewed a lot of students from the school. Some of them told the police that they might want to talk to me because I didn't quite fit in. So that's how I got on their radar. In addition, I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction. And the police thought that was suspicious, given that I barely knew the victim. A reinforcing factor is they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which claimed to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching that. I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect. So that intersected with one of the police tactics, which was, good cop, bad cop, in which I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. Prior to being a teenager, I thought about becoming a cop when I grew up, and that intersected also because all of my interactions with the police took on the dynamic that half the time they talked to me like I was a suspect, and when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and want to get away from them, they would switch it up. And Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was developed, and so they would say things like, "The kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time." They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said, "Look, we got some new information in the file. We want to share that with you. That's going to allow you to be more helpful to us. First, though, you need to take and pass a lie detector. And so the next day, rather than go to the school, I went to the police station for the test. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so therefore they didn't call around looking for me. They drove me from Peekskill across county lines, 40 minutes away by car, to the city of Brewster, which was in Putnam County, which meant I couldn't leave on my own anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police.
Mm.
I didn't have I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat.
Yeah.
The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read rights. I didn't understand the big words in a 4-page brochure which explained the polygraph, but then I figured, well, I'm there to help the police. So what does it matter? And they put me in a small room and he gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. Then he attached me to the machine and then he launched his third-degree tactic. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. And towards the end, he said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear to the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend came in the room and he said, look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do this any longer. You got to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was, no one else did either, was loomed large in my mind. And there was this possibility of harm and this false life preserver. So I made up a story based on the information that they gave me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time it was all said and done, I collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested.
Wow. There's so much here, Jeff. That is coercion and manipulation, at its best. One, you were a minor, right? And they never told your mom or your grandmother where you were. So that was a violation right there. Two, they used your story, right? Tried to validate things for you through that father figure. And I'm putting my quotes up here, but trying to give you a father figure to be able to further manipulate you. Talk about, and I know we haven't gotten there yet, but I want to hear what you have to say, having gone through the system yourself and now, helping other people, and we'll get there. But talk about, these tactics that they use in order to manipulate children, for one, right? Because you were still a child, but people in general too, right? Because they do this to adults as well. Talk about, why this is so wrong and, what people should do when they're in these situations, because you said so much there, and I want people to understand what they should do if they're faced with this.
So that's called those are all part of the Reed technique, which is it's an interrogation system that has a lot of psychological tactics built into it. I mean, isolate people, cut them off from morale, from friends and family, and you want to be in the police station or some other area, that where the police are in charge, and ignore, first of all, try to prevent suspects from even denying the crime. But if they do manage to get a denial, I'll continue on with the interrogation, as if there was no denial at all whatsoever. So I mean, those are just some of the scenarios and tactics like minimization, where minimization means trying to minimize the moral culpability, to try to make a crime sound as if it's understandable. So they would they can do things like make, well, yeah, is this what happened, or yeah, I would have did this, I would have did that myself. I can understand that. So I mean, those are all the tactics, some of the tactics that they applied to me. And look, coerced false confessions have caused wrongful convictions in 29% of the DNA proven wrongful convictions. And while adults have given coerced false confessions, particularly vulnerable populations are people with mental health issues and youth, which I was a youth. Yeah. And I want to just add quickly that my interrogation, it was not the best practice in terms of preventing wrongful convictions caused by coerced false confessions is recording the interrogation from beginning to end. And here they didn't record. They didn't record anything. There was no videotape. There was no audio tape. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And later on, when we get there, I mean, when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their testimony.
Wow. Wow. You know, as a mom of a son, my son is 17, so just a year older than you were at the time that your wrongful conviction took place. As a mom of 17-year-old, I'm just curious, like, what do I tell him? Like, just don't talk. Make sure that you can call me or call an attorney. And then it makes me beg the question of, you know, making sure you have an attorney on retainer, right? Or an attorney that you can call. If something happens, something like this happens to your child.
It's a good question you ask. So, the instruction everybody should give their children is, not to speak to the police without a lawyer. If the police want to speak to you, you can, ask for a lawyer and insist. Don't come down off that. And like the Miranda warning says, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. If you want, if you want an attorney will be, if you can't afford an attorney will be provided to you. So you don't have to have, an attorney on standby. If you just ask for an attorney and then insist on that, that's sufficient. But the innocence of suspects often works against them. They figure, well, if they're innocent and they don't know anything, they're not involved in anything, why shouldn't they waive their rights? Why shouldn't they waive their rights and speak to an attorney or speak to the police without an attorney? I mean, what could possibly happen? And then there's people that think, well, if I ask for an attorney, then I'm gonna look guilty, and that's the wrong line of reasoning to.
I've followed a few of cases similar to yours where people have been wrongly convicted. I've gained interest watching different shows, and it's piqued my interest. And one of the things I want to ask you, what outside you mentioned that the reason why they went to you was because some of the students said, well, you should check him out. Was that the only I guess piece of information that they targeted you for?
That's what got it started, But then again, they interpreted my being emotional as some sort of outward sign that I was guilty, and then there was the psychological profile, But again, that's not how they arrested me. We're just solely talking about how did I get on the police radar.
Yeah.
Right. And that's scary. And the reason why I bring that up because, now you're talking about the interpretation of kids that, if you're not on the in crowd, I can see, easily, well, check this one out. That one I never see. It's like, well, I never see that neighbor. You're just taking something and running with it. And to think that's something so simple could bring it up. And then, being a mom, like you said, Tracy, of two young men, watching my husband and my nephew constantly get pulled over by the police, in New Jersey, in northern New Jersey. These were always some of my fears of something happening, that they could not control. So it's scary to hear that on such a nothing, how much can come out of that.
Yeah.
So much can come out of that.
And I wanted to ask too, like how much of that was influenced by the community? Because you said, it's a suburban community. People were scared. Everybody was living in fear. How much of that was pressure on the police and even potentially like the mayor to just have to blame it on someone or to get someone to try to ease the fears and calm the community?
No, I think it is common. The more higher profile the case, the more pressure there is on the police to solve to quote unquote solve a crime, and hence the need to make an arrest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see that happen over and over again. And to your point, you've seen them overturned. You've seen so many convictions after, and the sad thing is after years, you see these convictions being overturned. And I want to give you time to finish the story, but it's sickening to think that this is still happening today.
Yeah.
And you say 1990, that that was the year I got married. I can't imagine this happening. I can, but it's crazy to hear that something could happen like this with really no information to even be drawn from to now come to a conviction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, the average length of wrongful incarceration in the DNA cases, also to piggyback off your point, is 14 years. So before the trial started, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, which showed that seminal fluid found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute. The prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. Once the DNA didn't match me, he suddenly claimed that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he said showed the victim had been promiscuous, which was a lie. But that opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that that was how the DNA didn't match me, and yet I was guilty. And then taking it a step further, he named another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but that was, but he never tried to prove that. He never got a DNA test result performed. He never even called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. At the same time, the public defender that I had essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He rarely met with me. He was always shutting me up when I tried to tell him I was innocent, what happened in the interrogation room. Then he never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession, to argue that that proved it was coerced and false. He literally never questioned the medical examiner. He should have never represented me because of a conflict of interest. So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender agency, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. So that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. Then in addition, in terms of the confession, sometimes he argued the confession never happened at all. Other times he argued that it did happen, but it was coerced. And at still other times he was arguing it was a false confession. So by taking this approach of just throwing things against the wall and hoping something sticks, he had to have had no credibility at all with the jury. The judge kept allowing the polygraphist to tell the jury that I failed the polygraph while banning my lawyer from asking him questions on the methods he used to arrive at his opinion. And, lastly, the victim's clothes, including her bra, had been entered into evidence by the prosecution. And that intersected with one of the statements that was coerced out of me, in which I said I ripped her bra off. The jury asked to see the bra, which was important because there's some bras, the way that they're made, you can't rip it off. So when they asked to see it, the judge said, well, the bra is not available anymore. It was left in the courtroom over the weekend, and the janitors apparently thought it was garbage, so it was thrown out, so it wasn't available anymore. Lastly, on the third day of the jury deliberation, they sent out a note, and they asked, well, if they can't come up with the verdict, will they be kept sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. I learned many years later that at that point it was 11-1 for a conviction, but there was a holdout juror, and the juror didn't think I was guilty, but they were pressing him. And when they got that answer back, that ratcheted things up, and nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday, not even that juror. So he switched his vote based on that. And as a result of all of that, I was found, guilty of a murder and rape, which I didn't commit, and I was given a 15 to life sentence, with the judge sentencing me, even though he said to me, maybe you are innocent.
Wow. And okay, so now that begs the question too, in a situation like that, where this happens with the jury, right? And they decide to convict you, and I get the manipulation that happened with them as well. But what can a judge do if a judge feels like there's not enough evidence here? This person could potentially be innocent. What can be done by the judge, even though this judge in particular in your case decided to just convict you and give you the sentencing? But what can be done by a judge here? Or how can someone try to appeal to the judge on your behalf if you had a better lawyer, or something. What can someone do?
Well, first off, I mean, my lawyer did move to dismiss the case against me once the DNA didn't match me. So the judge could have granted that motion. The second thing is that it's customary that when the prosecution rests, the defense can it, make a motion that's called a trial order of dismissal, and you're arguing to the judge, look, just there's legally insufficient evidence here to convict. So a
Mm-hmm.
judge could grant that motion, and in addition to that, the judge could have overturned the verdict. This was called a 330 motion. So that's
Mm-hmm.
after conviction, but before the sentencing. So, the judge can overturn the verdict by reversing any of the rulings that they had made against the defendant, prior to that. And if I had had a better lawyer, instead of him just verbally saying motion to overturn the verdict, he would
Hmm.
have actually submitted some moving papers and made arguments and cited law. I mean, he didn't do that. He submitted no papers and he made no arguments. He just verbally said, asked the judge to overturn the conviction. And if there are no moving papers, that's one of the grounds in which the judge can deny that motion.
Mm-hmm. So
Wow.
it mostly it's Jeffrey, was it solely on the your lawyer that blew the case, or was the judge culpable in because you mentioned a lot of things that didn't seem to be appropriate through the process, the loss of the evidence, the way the jury requested information and wasn't told certain things, even some of the motions that weren't appropriate even from the prosecution, because there was some seems like misbehavior on the prosecution side. Like, what was it, a three-prong system that created the conviction, or was it really just your attorney? Because I'm curious, because I guess I'm not known to be a cynical person, but I do know that judges and a lot of people are politically appointed to a lot of these positions. So I'm curious, in your opinion, was it all three, or was it really solely mostly your attorney?
It was every aspect of the system. So first of all, I'm going to take a half step back. It was the police.
It
First
was,
of all,
yes, yes,
they
it was the
they
police.
coerced the
Yes.
false confession out of me is one thing, and another thing is not content with merely coercing a false confession. They also fabricated a statement and attributed it to me. They claimed that I told them in the course of the confession that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not. And as a 16-year-old, that word wasn't in my vocabulary. And aside from that, that statement only appears in their police reports after the DNA didn't match me. It wasn't in any of their initial reports about the confession. So then,
Mm.
on top of that, when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back out into the field. They interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another. All of them told the police that she didn't have a boyfriend, there was no consensual sex, and the cops purposely did not document any of those witness interviews. And so, as a result of that, they did turn that over. There was nothing to turn over, and we could have used that. So, it was the police, first of all. Second
Hmm.
of all, there was prosecutorial misconduct. So, to be specific, one day before officially getting the DNA test results back from the FBI lab, the prosecutor ran to the grand jury and indicted me, so that this way he didn't have to present that. In addition to that, the medical examiner had been complained of in neighboring counties by authorities because he was moonlighting as a defense expert. And whichever way the money flowed is the way he colored his testimony rather than just giving ground level truth. So they never turned that over. We could have used that to impeach him, to challenge his credibility, because
Right.
remember, it was his fabrication that was even allowing the prosecutor to even have a theory to continue the case, because other than that, the DNA, that's supposed to be game, set, and match. So,
Right.
so the prosecutor, now the judge. So the judge did not suppress the confession, and we had a pretrial hearing on that. And I don't think we all need to be lawyers to know there was plenty of questionable things, a lot of red flags and police tactics. This statement wasn't voluntary. So he didn't grant that. He did not dismiss the case against me when the DNA didn't match me. He didn't need to rule. He should not have ruled that he should not have ruled that the polygraphist could repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph when I lied, claiming that I lied when I denied committing the crime. Could you imagine the prejudicial impact of that? And
Right.
then on top of that, banning my lawyer from asking questions about his methods. So that was all wrong. He gave the jury a wrong definition of what it meant to be in custody. So one of the instructions he gave to the jury, which of course factors into the analysis that the jury is going to do about whether or not the confession is coerced or not. So when the judge gave the instructions, instead of telling him what the definition is per New York law, which is whether a reasonably prudent person innocent of any crime would believe that they were free to go. That's what the definition is supposed to be. And so instead of him telling the jury that, he instead told the jury that custody means if the police stopped me on the streets with their guns drawn, taking me against my will into the police station.
Wow.
And
wow.
Then,
what a drastic change in the definition.
And then when the evidence was thrown out, first of all, the court had an obligation to preserve the evidence. And when that failed, he should have granted the defense motion to give us a mistrial, or we also asked that the testimony concerning the bra that be stricken. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that either. He certainly shouldn't have told the jury that they're going to be sequestered over the Christmas holiday. Right. I was found guilty a couple of weeks before. What do you think? The court was working on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Right.
They quit working, before that. So there's no way that they would have, kept going like that. Like I said, I was convicted with a couple of weeks prior to Christmas. So there's no way they would have been kept sequestered, over the Christmas holiday. So all of that stuff was all completely wrong, and it was all compounded by my attorney. So really, it was like a 4-way gang up in order to produce the results. And another thing I want to quickly mention, another fault of my lawyer is that, I'm 17 at the time of the trial. I had turned 17, shortly before the trial. I had never been arrested before. I never went to court before. I was in over my head, but my lawyer managed to turn the attorney-client privilege. He managed to let that work against me. So he would not allow an adult. He wouldn't allow my mother. He wouldn't allow my mother's boyfriend. He wouldn't allow my uncle to be involved in any of his conversations with me when it came to important strategic decisions, such as whether or not I was going to testify or not, such as whether we were going to have a jury trial or a bench trial. And then another thing, he said that he wasn't going to let me testify because his one-loss record was better when his clients don't testify as they do. And that doesn't really make sense, because most of your clients probably have a pre-existing criminal record. And if they take the stand, the prosecutor would likely be able to ask questions about those prior convictions. But that didn't apply to me. I had no convictions. I had no arrests. And then he said, oh, it's not my job to prove that you're innocent. They got to prove you're guilty. Yeah, okay, that's a legal principle. It doesn't work that way in the real world. If there's a confession, the jury's thinking convict. You got to answer that confession. You got to explain that.
Right.
Just prove it. Bring it all together in your closing argument. Except that he didn't do any of that.
Wow.
I want to take a quick break here, because I want to go into the next part of your story, Jeffrey, just to talk about, kind of how things went after you were convicted, going to prison, and then, how you got exonerated and what you're doing now. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, everyone, but don't go anywhere. I know that this story is compelling, and I know you don't want us to break, but we're just going to take a quick one, and then we're going to come back. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and we are back. So we're not going to delay this. We're going to bring Dr. Melissa and Jeffrey Deskovich here back because we want to get back into your compelling story. So before the break, we just mentioned that we wanted to talk about, after the conviction, what the process was to get you exonerated, and then talk about, everything that you've been doing since then.
Well, before you start, Jeffrey, one of the things that I just want to keep in you, and I'm sure you'll answer this as you explain the rest of the story, is what would be the motivation to bring you, convict you, but still have a murderer on the street?
Mm.
Well, look, I just that. I mean, you become, you advance from a junior detective to a, senior detective, and you go from senior detective further. The lieutenant who oversaw everything later became the police chief, based in part
Mm.
on my conviction. So, moving up in ranks, and then and of course with that comes increased salary, and then there's a public perception that they solved the crime, so the pressure's off. On the prosecutorial level, again, you get promotions based on conviction rate, and on the elected officials end of it, a lot of times people who are the district attorney just simply as a stepping stone to a higher political office, and getting there, or even just simply getting reelected. Well, I got a 99% conviction rate, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
that. So that's all. That's motivating factors.
yeah. Your political ploy to their career, and it's unbelievable, unbelievable.
So from there, I naively thought that the court system got better the higher up you went, but that's not true. And in fact, the narrower and narrower your path is to winning your case, the higher up you go. So I'll walk everybody through my appeals and ultimate exoneration. So I went to the appellate division, direct appeal. That's the first one you go to. My lawyer, I had a different lawyer now, totally different agency. This lawyer was great. I wish I would have had her at the trial level. Might have gone different. So she raised 10 issues of law. So she argued that I was innocent based on the DNA that took the form of that the evidence was legally insufficient, that the prosecution hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, that the verdict was against the weight of the evidence. She argued my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the way I've been questioned. She argued that my Sixth Amendment right to confrontation was violated by the judge banning my lawyer from asking the polygraphist questions. And she also argued the prejudicial effect of the polygraphist telling the jury that I failed. She argued about the evidence being thrown out. She argued about the custody ruling. She argued the judge should not have allowed the jury to go to the crime scene since they had changed. And then lastly, she argued that the judge was prejudicial. So the appellate division, they wrote that I was not in custody, that I was free to come and go as I wanted, and therefore the statements were voluntary. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is kind of a head scratcher because the DNA didn't match me. And they knocked out the rest of my issues by saying they've looked at my remaining contentions and found them either to be without merit or not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0 on that. And it was all downhill after there. The re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. The Court of Appeals, New York State's highest court, the procedures, you have to get permission to appeal to them before they'll agree to let you appeal to them. They declined to give me permission to appeal. I lost in federal court because my lawyer was given the wrong information by the court clerk pertaining to the filing procedure. So as a result of that, my petition arrived 4 days too late. So former Westchester District Attorney Janine Pirro, her office argued that the 4 days lateness was prejudicial to the government, and so the court should simply rule that I was late, and that's what they did. I appealed that by permission to the Federal Court of Appeals, where then U.S. Supreme Court Justice she was a Federal Court of Appeals judge, Sonia Sotomayor, her and her colleague Rosemary Pooler. They upheld that ruling. They then declined the re-argument motion, and then the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So that's the end of my appeals. That's 7 appeals. My appeals are exhausted. We're 11 years in. At that point, the only way back into court is if there's some previously unknown evidence of innocence, which probably would have resulted in a different outcome, or if there's been a retroactive change in the law. So I had no money. Neither I nor my family had any money to hire an attorney or investigator, hence a letter writing campaign. Wrote anyone and everyone I could think of. I wrote law firms, nonprofits, faith-based organizations. If I could come up with something in my head that somebody could do, which could set in motion a chain of events that culminated into my getting the representation I needed, I wrote the letter. So I did that for 4 years. Then I went to the parole board, where largely because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, I got turned down for parole. In terms of how I got exonerated, one of those letters, which I wrote to a book author in care of a publishing company, but the publishing company instead sent it to an investigator. The investigator wrote me. When I sent her the DNA test results, she was instantly convinced of my innocence. So she gave me ideas. She tried to get people to take my case. One of her ideas proved to be the winning one. She suggested I write the Innocence Project, a nonprofit organization in Manhattan that frees wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country where DNA testing can show innocence, where no prior testing has been conducted. So I wrote them, I filled out their application, and I waited. I wouldn't have thought to write them again since they denied me the first go around, because the DNA results were already in front of the jury. So doing testing wouldn't have been anything new. So the investigator had told me, in light of the DNA data bank being created, the prior denial is irrelevant. Then she lobbied them to take my case. Also, she got other respected legal professionals to do that. I got lucky that one of the case intake workers presented my case a total of 3 times to the lawyers before they agreed to take it. So getting the representation was the first key. Second key is Pirro left office and her successor was willing to let me have the testing. And the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank. And it was there because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and had 2 children. So my conviction was overturned on September 20th, 2006. Went back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all charges were dismissed against me on actual innocence grounds. He was subsequently arrested and pled guilty and was sentenced for the crime.
Wow. Wow.
So their political advancement resulted in another woman being killed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was this person in the community you were in, or was a random killing?
He was in, well, both. So at the time of crime, the victim was 15. I was 16. The actual perpetrator was a 29-year-old. He was a drug addict. He had some prior drug convictions, and he was in the park. So she went to the park to take some photos for her photography class. And it was like a path, but it was a wooded area. She was there to take the pictures. He was hanging out there by himself, high, and he saw her, and he attacked, murdered, and raped her.
Wow. Wow.
But
Wow.
he lived in that community, so they could have investigated and found him. But
they could have it. Sure, they definitely could have. And I mean, he strangled the victim in my case, and he strangled the victim in the case afterwards. And they had, and not only that, but it was the same. He had the same prosecutor as I did, so it's kind of hard to believe that it never crossed the mind of either the cops or the prosecutor. Well, we know Deskovic's DNA didn't match. There's no murders at all. Then there's this murder. We know it doesn't match the kid, and this other woman is murdered by strangulation. You mean to tell me that never crossed their mind to
right
together?
They didn't feel like doing no work.
Yeah.
Try to find the right person so that another person, innocent person, would not be killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Oof.
Wow.
And to think that with all the DNA alone, right? There's just the DNA alone, right? Knowing that didn't match, right? And for this to go so far up the chain and no one was willing to allow you to even to appeal. Like I understand the
I
corruption.
don't, I don't understand. I
I
don't
don't
understand.
understand it, but I'm saying you get that there's corruption within that community, right? When it comes to the political process in that community. But for you to go to federal, all the way up to the Supreme Court,
Supreme Court.
and
Nobody gave it.
right, and no one wanted to take this case and say, you know what, this does not make sense. That's so discouraging when it comes to our full judicial process here in this country. That is so discouraging. And you were still a minor at the time that everything, not when you were looking to get exonerated, but at the time that everything happened, you were a minor. Like, no one said, like, let's examine what's happening, because this is a child. This is a child that is going through this.
Yeah.
This is like, it's so disheartening to think about what happens in this country. So I want to talk about what you like, just what has come out of this for you, because you have behind you the Descovich Foundation, and I want you to have the opportunity to talk about that. You know, you becoming an attorney, you fighting for people who are innocent and accused of a crime and convicted, and hopefully we can, you know, have people come through your foundation and not have to get to where you got to and spend so much time in jail for something that they did not do. So talk to us about, you know, your crusade, I'm going to say now, for what you're doing for people out there who are innocent.
Sure. And one last point quickly, I want to mention that en route to all of that we talked about on a post-conviction level, I was also denied DNA testing several times, you know, trying to get it. So when I asked for it, you know, twice, like once in 97, 98, so I could have come home a lot sooner than 2006.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
just to explain, the DNA testing would have gone into the data bank, and they could have quickly found that it didn't match, and then have matched the victims up if it went in earlier.
Correct. Yeah, they would have taken the DNA that didn't match, we put in the data bank. It could have matched the perpetrator, and that I would have come out. The same thing that they did later on could have been done sooner than that. So look, it was very difficult to reintegrate back into society. I mean, technology was different: GPS, cell phone, internet. It was awkward when I would meet up with my extended family, because most of them had never come to see me. Technology, when mentioned the technology, but then also culture being different, cities and towns being different, the psychological after effects, the social stigma of having been in prison, yes, wrongfully, but there nonetheless. You know, is it, how much of it rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? Always passed over for gainful employment. You know, so I lacked stability of housing at one point, a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter, having particular difficulties because during that time period of 17 to 32, a lot of important rites of passage, a lot of growing up happens. So I never had a driver's license. I never lived on my own. I never wrote a check. I never went shopping. I never had to balance a budget. Nonetheless, during that difficult time period, for my first 5 years, I was an individual advocate. I was speaking. I became a weekly columnist for a weekly newspaper. I was treating privacy for awareness by doing media and ultimately new media interviews. I was regularly meeting with elected officials. I got a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree because I came within 30 credits of doing that. At the time, funding was cut of college education for prisoners. So they gave me the scholarship. They allowed me to live on campus, which is how I avoided the homeless shelter. They gave me the meal plan. After 5 years, I finally received some financial compensation. So I wanted to continue that advocacy work, but from a nonprofit perspective, and I wanted to be involved in trying to free people. You know, that's something I couldn't have done on my own, hence using some of the money, 7 figures of it, to start the organization, and with the goal of freeing people and while in the same position that I was in and preventing what happened to me from happening to others. So to that end, you know, we have been able to free 14 people since opening our doors in 2011. Wow. We've thank you. We helped pass 3 laws and then another 6 as key members of the coalition group. It could happen to you. And at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments, hence going to law school. becoming an attorney. I feel like my advocacy work went to a different level just from when I got the bachelor's degree, and then I got the master's. With my thesis on wrongful conviction cause and reform, because I know a lot about the justice system and its issues, not limited only to the issues of the case. And I think that obtaining the master's degree and writing the thesis on wrongful conviction, cause, and reform added to that. And in a similar way, I went up another level in becoming an attorney. All in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer. Happy to share that a couple of years ago, that dream took a major step towards realization. So, as co-counsel, assistant lead attorney Oscar Michelin, we overturned Andre Brown's conviction. He had been in for 23 years. Got the decision in December, and so he came home in time
Yeah.
in his life.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So currently we have 13 active cases. I'm counsel in 9 of them. Most of the time I'm second seating a more experienced lawyer, contributing, but also learning at the same time. And in a few of them, I am the lead attorney just to get that experience. And I have the more experienced guy check his ego at the door, and he's second seating me. But he's a mentor, he's a friend, he's a colleague. Oscar Michelin, want to shout out. So we're working on those cases, and we have another 4 cases that I'm not involved in, the foundation cases, but I just simply get a periodic update here and there. But the goal is to try to get as many people home as possible. We are pursuing policy work in policy changes in New York, Pennsylvania, California. So really quickly, in New York, we are working on 3 changes of law that would prevent false confessions. Again, keeping in mind that false confessions have caused wrongful convictions 29% of the cases. So we have the police. We have the police deception bill, which would ban police from using deception in interrogations, which would be a recognition that that's inherently coercive. There's the Youth Interrogation Act, which would give 16, 17-year-olds, kids younger than that, a non-waivable right to counsel. You would have to speak to an attorney to explain your rights before you could decide if you're going to waive them or not, keeping in mind that kids don't understand their rights. I didn't understand mine. Every time it came to that portion of the Miranda warnings where it said anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, my mind went to what I saw on TV, and I would think civil court context. And I remember thinking to myself, court, what are you talking about? We're not going to court. And lastly, one of the laws we helped pass previously in 2017 mandated that the police have to record custodial interrogations. But unfortunately, the law came out watered down, and there's exceptions for homicide, sex offenses, and drug cases. We want to close out all those exceptions, record. Okay, it'll be for better evidence. It'll protect honest cops from false allegations of coercion. We can see if somebody's being coerced or not. We can see if there's threats. Does somebody really have guilty knowledge, non-public facts, or are they being given the details purposely or inadvertently that they just parrot back? In Pennsylvania, that's one of 12 states that currently does not compensate people who've been exonerated. So we're working on passing that. We've had success in getting a bill introduced both on the Assembly side and the Senate side. So we're continuing to build support for that. And in California, we're trying to mimic the law that we helped pass, which was a landmark bill in New York. So the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So an independent oversight board that can investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. So it would give people who've been wronged in that way a place to go to get some justice. And then in addition to that, we have the hope that it would serve as a deterrent. It would deter prosecutors from engaging in misconduct. So we passed that in New York, and we are working on building support for that in California. So the idea is that in general, if both New York and California pass a law, most of the time the rest of the country follows. So we're hoping that can set a domino effect. So yeah, I mean, the prosecutor is the strongest actor in the justice system, and yet there's no oversight for them.
That's
And
interesting.
I'm so sorry that we have to close this out. We have to close the show out. I wanted
That's a quick question.
Yeah. No. Sorry, Mimi. No. We cannot. We have to close out the show. But I want to say that Jeffrey's going to be on the Whole Living Show tomorrow. So join us tomorrow and ask more questions. I want to first share quickly, because we need to share the link here where you can donate to the foundation that you see behind you. The foundation is looking for 25,000 people who believe that sacrificing $3 every month via a recurring donation in order to help free innocent people and prevent wrongful convictions. So we're going to put this link up on the show page as well. So I wanted to make sure that we got this in before we close out the show. I'm not going to say that it's part 2, but I guess we could kind of say, a continuation, a crossover, whatever you want to say, tomorrow night at 7 p.m. on the Whole Living Show. Please join us, because I know that there's so much more that Jeffrey can share. We thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your story.
Really quickly, and everybody out there, we love you, and see us tomorrow, and then see us again here on Fem Talk next week at 8:30 p.m.